Hi everyone, and welcome to the Git and GitHub crash course for beginners. Right, now just to give you some clarity in terms of Git and GitHub. So Git is essentially a version control system that helps us to track changes in code, and it also helps us to collaborate with others, so specifically other developers when we're working on a project and such. And to compartmentalize this process and make it more efficiently, we can also utilize Git in tangent with GitHub. Now, GitHub is a cloud-based platform that hosts our Git repositories, and this helps to make collaboration a lot easier in effect with Git as well. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to visit github.com and also Git. Now, I will be sure to add in the following links accordingly for you so that you'll be able to access them so that you can go on ahead and visit these sites. So it's at github.com and then at git-scm.com. And you want to first of all download Git. So if you are on a macOS device, it will automatically detect that and you can download for macOS. If you are on a Windows device, it will automatically detect that and you can download for Windows. Okay. All right. And the next thing, of course, is to go on ahead and visit github.com and then you can sign up for a GitHub account. The process is quite simple. You just need to go on ahead and fill out some basic details such as a username and email and complete a CAPTCHA and verify your email, and then you are good to go. So that's the first thing that you're going to want to do, to set up Git and GitHub on your machine. Right, now after you have set up Git, you're of course going to be able to utilize the git bash terminal, which as you can see is right here. And this option will be available to you near the end. And once you've installed Git, you can also just say git bash, and then you can open up that git bash terminal. And that is essentially what we have right here. Okay, so just a little bit of clarity on that before we get started. Right, now the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to want to work with a project. So here I have a very simple project open in Visual Studio, and here I have an index.html file here, very simple and basic, and I have a styles.css file which is linked to this index.html file. So assuming that you have a simple project that you're working with, so if you know some basic index, basic HTML and CSS and JavaScript, or whichever language that you're working with, this is going to be perfectly suitable for you. Right, now the first thing that we need to do is we need to configure our identity. So as soon as you've also set up Git, you can head on to git bash and you want to say git config and you want to say -- global and you want to say user.name. Now if you have Git already installed and you forgot about it or you didn't know, if you press that, it's going to show what is the username that you've set in the past. Now of course, if you've never used Git before, which I'm assuming most of you have, it's not going to have a result here. So to set your username, you want to type the same command as follows, and you want to set up your username. What do you want to be called? So here I'm just going to say Arno, very simple. Okay, and now if I run that command without the set string there, it's going to say Arno. So that is how you can set your username. Okay, perfect. Now the next thing that you can do is you can also set your associated email as well. That's the next thing you can do. So you can say git config -- global, and by global, this global flag means globally on our machine, on our system, and then user.email. And that's going to show out the associated email that is linked to your Git system. Okay, but if you want to set up an email, what you can essentially do is you can go ahead and set the following prefix, and then here you can just say test@mail.com, press enter, and then it's going to be set for you. So that's how you can essentially go on ahead and set up an associated email. Okay, so it's recommended that the email that you set is the email that you are utilizing with your GitHub account. So make sure that you keep that in mind when you are essentially setting up your email at hand that you are working with. So remember to keep that into account. Right, so let's continue. So now I am assuming that you have a project that you will be working with. So as you can see on my desktop, I have a folder called My Project. And of course, in my project, I have an index.html file and a styles.css file that I have already set up. So if you haven't got a sample project, just go on ahead and make something that you want to utilize. All right. Now this is going to be our first project under Git version control. Now the next thing you're going to want to do is to initialize a Git repository within your project. So in my case, my project is literally called my project. Now we need to head on over to this directory first of all, before we can initialize the Git repository. So we can open up Git bash, and you want to say cd, which means change directory, and we want to go to the desktop. Now we're currently on our desktop now, and if I look on my desktop, I only have one folder called my project, and that's exactly what I want to work within. So I'm going to say cd to now change the directory into my project. Now it is case sensitive, and now I'm currently within my project. Great. So now we can initialize a Git repository in my project. And if you want to clear this up, just for clarity, you can just say clear, and that will just help you to make things cleaner. Now the command is git init, okay, and this creates a hidden.git folder that's going to mark this directory as a Git repository. So we can run this command. There we go. So we can see it said initialized empty Git repository in the following directory here accordingly. So in that directory here. Great. So now we've got that initialization process in place. All right. And as you can see with both of these files, we have untracked here. So these files aren't tracked yet by Git as they should be. So what we want to do is we want to check if Git is essentially tracking our files and which files have been changed or added and not saved yet by Git. And to do so, you just want to say git status. So we can see here we have two untracked files by Git here. We can see an index.html file and a styles.css file. So if we look here, we can see we have index.html and styles.css, which is not tracked. So what we need to do is, in order for this to be tracked, the first thing we need to do is to stage these files to like a staging tree. So we're going to want to do that. Now, there are two ways in which you can do this. Let's just say clear. You can either say git add and then dot, and that's going to automatically add all of the files to the staging area within your directory. So I'm in my project, and that means it's going to stage index.html and styles.css to the tracking area. So git add dot is going to save all, but if you just want one, you can just refer directly to the file that you want to stage. So if I just want index.html to be staged, I can say index.html. Now if I say git status, I can see that I have staged index.html in green, but in the red you can see it says styles.css. Okay, and if we look here, we can see that index.html has been added to the staging area, but styles.css has not been added yet, and it's still currently untracked. Okay, right. And what we can do now is we can clear this up. And now what you can do, instead of saying git add and then referring to styles.css, I'm going to show you the way that will work for all files. You can just add the dot, and then you can just press enter. Okay, and now if I say git status, we can see we have no more tracked files, and all of these files here in green are staged, and we can also commit them then. Okay, now by saying git add, essentially, we are preparing our files to be committed. Okay, so you can kind of think of this as putting files into a to-do list before saving them permanently. Okay, so that's how we can go ahead and set that up accordingly. Right, and we can see both have been added, as you can see. Right. Now, the next thing that we can also do is we can commit our changes, and this is going to save the changes to Git's history. Okay, so what you want to do to commit the file, we can say git commit, then you want to use the -m flag, which of course stands for message, and then here we can just say initial commit and enter. There we go, so it's committed our files, namely index.html and styles.css. Okay, great, so let's say git status. And we can see we've got nothing to commit, and our working tree is clean. Okay, so we've got nothing set up as follows. All right, clear. Right, so let's go on ahead and experiment a bit. And as you can see now, none of them are in the stage of just being added. It's now been committed. So after you commit files, you're going to see it's not going to have the following symbols. So U means untracked. A means, of course, it's been added to the staging area. And if you see blank here, that's either going to mean you don't have a Git repository when you ran Git and Git, or that your files have been committed. Now let's say I want to create a new file here. So I'm just going to create a sample file, say new file, and I'm going to call this about.html, very simple. And here I'm just going to put in some basic text here, say h1 about me page. Very simple. You can close that. I'm saving it. And here you can see it is untracked. Okay, so we can see it's untracked, and we need to stage this file, so we need to add it. So I'm going to go ahead and say git status. Okay, I can see about.html. And for me to ensure that it's tracked and add it to the staging area, I need to say git add, and I can just say dot to include all. And now I can say git status, and I can see now it's been added. All I need to do now is to commit this file. So let's clear this up, and we need to say git commit -m, and here I'm going to say added an about page. So in the quotes here is where you put in the actual text. There we go. So we can see it created that for the about.html page. And say git status again, and we can see nothing to commit, and our tree is clean. Great. Right, another useful command is to use the log command, and this helps to track all of the commits that we have made for this repository that we're working with. So you can say git log, and as you can see here, it's going to outline, of course, all of the commits that you've made. So you're going to see here the username and the associated email address, the date of when it occurred, and the name of that commit that you made. So whatever you put in quotes here, so when I said add it an about page and initial commit, that is the message. And we can also see the process here in terms of what was first, and what you'll see on top is always going to be the recent commits, and then what is of course near the bottom will be the older commits that you have set up accordingly. Okay, great, so we've got that in place. Okay, all right, so let's continue. Right, now the other useful command that I want to explain with you is if you were to remove files. So let's have a look here. Let's say I want to remove a file now, and I'll remove this about.html file that I created. You can just simply say git rm for remove, and then you want to refer to the file that you want to delete. So here it's about.html. So you want to say about.html. Okay, so that's going to output what you're going to remove, and now we can see it is now gone. Right, now let's go to git status and see the current status, and we can see here now on our branch here that we deleted this about.html file here. So what we're going to want to do now is we're going to want to run a commit to say what we did. So I'm going to say git commit -m, and I'm going to say deleted about page. Okay, so that a commit occurred. You can see that it deleted the about.html page. We can say clear, git status now, and we should see we don't have anything new to commit. So when you are utilizing commit, this is for all the actions you make to your files. So if, for example, you are deleting files, if you are adding files, and it's also going to work in tangent for if you are updating files. So let's say I have this index.html file and I'm going to make an update. So I'm just going to change something. Let's say right at the bottom here, I say, I created this website. You can just add anything. You want to save that, you can see here in green that Git automatically picks up that this was an update to this file. So now, if we go to the Explorer tab, you can now see we have M here. So this means that this file has been modified. Okay, so we have made a change to this file. Let's go back to our terminal and let's say git status. Let's see where we're at. So we can see here that I have a file that I've modified, namely the index.html file here. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to ensure that this is in turn committed. Okay, so we can just go on ahead and say git commit -m, and here I'm going to say modified index, let's say modified homepage. Okay, and as you can see here that there's no commit that we need to make, because remember, we need to first add. So remember, you want to add first. So let's say clear, say git add everything, then you want to say git commit. And there we go, it goes ahead and performs that commit by performing all the insertions here. So now if I go back, you can now see that there is no modification that's needed. So remember, when you modify and you update your files, you want to say git add to that particular file, and then you want to say git commit. Okay, so remember that process. Okay, so we've got that in place now. So now we know how we can work with Git in terms of updating our files, in terms of deleting our files, adding files, or creating files. So this is kind of the bread and butter that you'll need in terms of the base commands. And again, let's just reiterate, if I say git log, we can now see that I've got that that process here in terms of modified web page just here. And now if I scroll down, I can see all of the other commits. You can press, if you want to get out of this area, you can just press Control and C. Oh, that does happen from time to time. So what I'm going to do is just close this. So that can happen sometimes. We can just reopen. Okay, so sometimes it does. Those kind of bugs do occur. So I'm going to say cd desktop, and we want to go into my project and clear. Okay, there we go. Right, so we're back where we were. Perfect. Okay, so let's continue. Now the next thing we want to do is we want to create a GitHub repository. So now we're going to work with GitHub. So let's head on to GitHub. Now I trust you have an account by now. So what I'm going to do is sign into my account, and then we'll meet at the dashboard where we'll create a GitHub repository. All right, so welcome back. So here we are on our GitHub dashboard here. Now what we're going to do is create a repository. So what you want to do is say new. And then here we want to give our repository a name here. So I'm going to say, let's call this let's say project 1, for example. Okay, then you can give a description to it. So here I'm going to say sample application. Now you can either choose to keep this repository public. However, anyone on the internet will be able to see your repository and all of your commits and such. So I'd recommend always keeping it to private just to ensure greater security. Now you can also add in a readme file, okay, and this is where you can write a long description for your project, and you can also learn more about it and such. You can also add in a git ignore file as well. So this is going to essentially pertain to any files that you don't want to track. Very important and useful, especially in the area where you have sensitive files that pertain to API keys that you don't want to commit on GitHub for best practices and security. And also a license here, which you can do if you want to set something specific in terms of licensing your software and such. Okay, so I'd recommend keeping this to private. However, with a private repository, you're going to have to take extra measures and either define a personal access token in most cases to gain access, or SSH in other words, but it's always worth the extra protection. Right, then you can create your repository. And there we go. So very well done on creating a repository. Now, as you can see, there are various ways in which you can get started. You can either set up, and this is going to be the instructions you need to follow if you want to create a new repository on the command line. And that is pretty much what we've done earlier on. We ran git init to initialize our repository. We ran git add to add our files. We ran git commit. We haven't pushed our files though yet, but we've done all of the following. Now, in our case, the next thing that we're going to want to do is to push an existing repository from the command line. So we're first going to have to add in our origin. Then we're going to want to ensure we're on the branch that we are going to work with, so in our main branch. And then we want to push everything to our branch. Okay, so essentially what we're doing now is we are connecting our local repository here to GitHub. And that is the step that we're following down here. So this is how Git is going to know where to send our code to when we push it online. So that's the first thing we need to do. So we can see our repository is known as project 1. We can see the user, of course, is stated as follows. That's our GitHub username. So we want to set up the origin here. So we want to copy this line of code here. And you want to paste it in here. But remember, what you're also going to want to do later on is you're going to want to set up your personal access token, but we'll get to that soon enough. So let's right click and paste, add that origin, and we can say enter. Okay, there we go. So we've got that set up. So we have connected our origin. So it won't have a message or anything usually. It will just go to the next line and indent. And as you can see, we're currently using the master branch, but we want to utilize the main branch since this is the default for GitHub. So what you're going to want to do to switch that up is you can just say git branch and you can say -m. So we want to move to our main branch. And now, as you can see, we're currently on the main branch. Perfect. Okay, and this is where we want to push our source code to. But for a best practice, you want to first go on ahead and create a personal access token. So you want to click here on the top right of your profile icon. Then you want to scroll down and you want to click on settings. Then on the left-hand side, you want to scroll down again until you see developer settings. Then you want to navigate to personal access token and you want to choose the classic token. Then on the right-hand side, you want to click generate new token and say generate new token for classic, general use. And now you can give it a name here. So here I'm going to say private repo access. Okay, that's all I want to do. You can also set the expiration date here. So you can say when you want this token to expire. It's really up to you. So you can just keep that in mind. So I'm going to leave it on the default. And then you want to select the scope here. So as you can see, there are various permissions here that you can go on ahead and pertain to this particular token that you're utilizing. However, the default that you need for this case is access to your repo. Okay, so you want to be able to have full control of your private repositories, which is actually the main thing that you want to have. Right, then you can scroll down and you can say generate token. Okay, so your token will only be shown to you once. So I'd recommend that you copy it. This is your own token and make sure you keep that safe somewhere. And I'm just going to refer this as my PAT, standing for personal access token. Right, so we've got that set up. Now we can click on the following icon, go to the home page. We can click on that repository that we created, and here we go. Right, now the next thing we want to do is push our repository, okay, and we're going to use git push -u origin main here, okay. So now we're going to ensure that we push our code to GitHub so it can be shared. Well, in our case, we don't want to share it with others, but we want to be able to have our code in storage. And here we're going to see on origin main, it's going to push it to the main branch. That's currently why we switched here. So when we run git push, it's going to push all of this code here to the main branch of GitHub. So we can go ahead and copy the following code, head on back, and you want to say paste. Right, so let's make sure we do that. And then we want to run this code. Okay. And we just need to be a bit patient now. Okay, there we go. And then we'll get the Windows Credential Manager to connect to GitHub. You can either sign in with your browser if you're logged into GitHub. You don't need to use a token technically, but I always find it a bit easier. So I like to go to token and paste in my personal access token and sign in. And then that's going to give me access to this repository so that I can push my code, as we can see, onto the main branch. Great, so let's say clear. And now, if you were to refresh the page here, you'll now notice that your source code has been pushed. So as you can see, very well done. You've now pushed your index.html file and also your styles.css file, or whichever files you have within your project, as you can see as follows. So well done. You have successfully gone ahead and pushed your code to GitHub, which is now safely stored in a private repository. Well done. Okay. Now, as you can see, if we can scroll down here, we can see that we're also able to add a README file. So as I mentioned earlier on, a README file is technically an overview or long description over your project that you have. So the reason I'm going to demonstrate this part here is because I want to show you how you can pull updates from GitHub. Okay, so if you have some code in here that has changed, because you can technically go on ahead and you can create files here as well, although you shouldn't really do so, but that is something else that can happen. You can also have files here that don't reflect within your local repository here on your machine. So let's say I add a new readme file here, which is going to be part of my repository. Okay, I can technically just zoom in a bit, and I can just enter in the file contents here. So I'm going to say this is a sample project for testing purposes only. You can also switch to the preview, and that's going to show you what your README is going to look like just below your repository, so below your code. And then when you're happy, you can say commit changes. That's going to be your commit message, and here you can add in a description for that message if you'd like. And you can also commit directly to the main branch, that's the default, or you can create a new branch and then start up a pull request. But that's something that we'll get to soon enough. But let's keep it basic and push to our main branch and say commit. And there we go. We can now see on our main branch, we now have a README file here. And you can now see down here that output that is being shown. Okay, and this is all on the main branch. As you can see, our default branch is the main branch. And if we had other branches, if we were to click on view all branches, we'll be able to see all of them, but right now we're just using the main branch for our main code. We'll get to branching soon enough. Right, now if you head on back to your project here on your machine, you'll notice that the update hasn't reflected. So let's say we want to pull an update from GitHub. We actually want to see that file or the change here that we have, because we have a README file here in our repository, but we don't see it here. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to open up your Git bash terminal, and you can say git pull origin main, because remember, if we go back, we created a README file on our main branch. So we're saying here, I want to pull from the main branch here of my repository. Now, since we set up the origin earlier on, it's going to know which repository we're referring to and such. So if I run that command, okay, it's going to connect to it, and then here we can see we have one file changed. It was an insertion, so that means we have a new file. Now if we head on back to my project here, you can now see that that README file that we created that just says this is a sample project for testing purposes only is now available to us in our local repository and not only in our GitHub repository. Okay, so that is how we can pull our files. So if you want to pull any changes and such. Okay. Perfect. All right, so let's continue. Now, the next thing that we're going to focus on is if we want to ignore any unwanted files. Now, this becomes pertinent if we have files that we want to ensure aren't tracked in terms of logs or dependencies, or in general, the most common use case if we have sensitive information that we're working with in our application, such as API keys, for example, Stripe API keys, PayPal, anything with payments, or anything sensitive like secret keys or access keys, etc. Now, technically speaking, in development, you'll go ahead and add this information in a .env file, and then you will then put this file or reference this file in a git ignore file. So when you commit your application to GitHub and all the associated files, that you don't expose this file within your GitHub repository. And it's a best practice to ensure that you add this in earlier on. So let's say, for example, we add a new file and we call this a .env file. Now, usually in development, this is the file that you usually utilize when you are storing your sensitive data. So for example, you might have something known as API key in here, and it has a certain value of such. Now, as you can see, we have this .env file here, and we're working in development and we need to reference our secret keys or our information and such, but we don't want to push this file to GitHub itself. So what you're going to want to do is to create a new file, and you need to call this .git ignore. Okay, and in this .git ignore file, you want to add all the files that you want to ignore when you are pushing to GitHub. So in this case, you want to ignore the .env file, and you want to save that. And as you can see now, it's now grayed out. So that means that it's going to be ignored. It's no longer tracked by Git. But if you were to remove this and save your file, you can now see it lights up, and you can see that white text quickly shown. but if we put it back, we can see it briefly grays out, and there we have it. So that is a safe way to do so. Now we want to perform the test. So we're going to run git commit, git add, git commit, and then git push. So let's do that. So first we want to say git add, and we can just say everything. Then we can say git commit -m, and here I'm going to say testing, let's say testing sensitive files. Okay, let's go ahead and use that as the commit message. And we can then say git push, and we can just refer to it as origin main. We want to push to our main branch. There we go, it's been pushed, clear. Now let's head on back and refresh. And now you can see that that git ignore file has been pushed. However, you can see that that .env file doesn't exist because we've ensured that it hasn't been pushed with .git ignore. And that is the safest way to deal with any sensitive information, because your .env file will consist of all of the sensitive data that pertain to your application. All right, great. So very well done on that. Right. Now, the next thing that I want to do is I want to teach you how you can utilize a few shortcuts with Git. So let's say you want to commit all of your modified files in one step. Typically, you'll have to say git add and then git commit. Now, I'm going to show you how you can do that in one line to save you some time. So if we are editing a file, for example, and here I'm just going to add in some text that says website created by great devs, just something random, and I've modified that index.html file, as we can see by the M. Now let's say I want to commit this. Now typically you would say git add dot, and then you will say git commit -m and then your message. But let's say we want to do this in one line. What you can do is you can say git commit dash and A for add, and then M, of course, for the message. And here I'm just going to say updated homepage. There we go. So we can see that that file has been changed, and we've added in the insertion, so the modification. So if I say git status, you're going to see that there's nothing that needs to be changed or adjusted with adding and committing. So what you want to do now is just say git push. We can say origin main. That's going to push it to our branch with that modification. There we go. So now if I head on over to my repository and refresh, you can now see that that message there appears, which says updated homepage. Right, perfect. And we can see that modified is gone now. So that is one way in which you can commit all your modified files in one step. Now there is another way in which you can do this if you want to manually add and commit in one command. So let's say you only have one specific file, and let's say for argument's sake, I go back here and I'm saying, just say by very good devs. I'm just making a modification. And you just want to refer to one particular file. You can just head on back and you can just say git add, and the file is index.html. So I'll say index.html. Then you can use 2 ampersands and then say git commit -m. And here I'm going to say changed text on a home page. And I want to actually put this in single quotes. Okay, it's going to do the same thing. Now, however, this is kind of the same thing as before. However, you're doing it in one line. So you can decide to do it sequentially in order and press enter each time, or you can just put it flatly in one line. And then, of course, we can say git push origin to our main branch. Okay, there we go. Right, so that was done. Let's refresh. Let's see that commit, and when we pushed it, change text on homepage. Great, well done. Okay, now the next thing I want to go through is a few of the basics of GitHub in terms of the interface. So we can see we have a lot of options available. So under code here, of course, this is going to be our code pertaining to the repository which we're currently within. We can see the lock icon. This means that you're working with a private repository. Without the lock, that means you're in a public repository. This is the username that is part of, that owns this repository here according to your username. If there are any issues, okay, users can go ahead and raise a new issue. This usually occurs if you are, for example, collaborating with others. So with GitHub, you can collaborate with other users and members and such and the like, and they can raise issues, and then you can go ahead and debug them and answer them based on your code. We also have various pull requests. So again, this also pertains to an act of collaboration. If you're collaborating with people, they'll of course push their code, and then you can evaluate their code and see if this is something you want to integrate within the project that you're working with, and you can submit that pull request and accept it. We also have actions here. Now, actions is essentially part of GitHub Actions. So this is where you can implement basically CI/CD processes. So if you want to utilize continuous integration, this is very helpful for building and testing your code, and then continuous deployment to automate deployments with your application to a server. A little bit out of scope for this particular crash course, but that is something that I just wanted to mention. Okay, you can also head on to projects, and this is going to list out any projects that you are working with. We also have a tab for security. So if you want to implement any specific policies, or if you want to implement any alerts for code scanning or any dependabot alerts or anything of the like, you can go ahead and set that up accordingly. Then we also have insights here. So this gives you some insights that you can refer to, or if you want to add in some insights in terms of graphs or anything of the such, we can see we have a few options here on the left-hand side. And of course, settings here. In this part here, you can of course change and rename your repository name. We can refer to the collaborator section where you can add collaborators for people to work on the code with you and to work on your project along with you. And if you scroll down, you'll see there'll be various settings, and the main one being the danger zone area. So this pertains to if you want to delete your repository, archive it, transfer ownership, change the visibility. So if it's private and you want to go public, or if you want to go public to private, you can do so here. And of course, just before that, you can see there's a lot of other options that you can select. Some are defined automatically depending on how you set up your repository as public or private and such, and also with the GitHub default settings in place in terms of pull requests that you can make, or any features that you want to disable or re-enable. All right, so let's head on back to code. All right, so that's just a bit of a short overview on the like. Now, on the right-hand side, you'll see some information pertaining to your repository. So here we can see the name of the repository in terms of the description. So we have a sample application. We can see if there's any stars, if any forks, and we can see if there's a readme file available for this project, which there is. We can see if there's any new releases, any packages that have been published according with this repository, and what languages are primarily used. So it gives us a bit of an estimate in terms of the languages used, whether it's HTML, CSS, and the like. And we can also see a nice tag here that says private to indicate this is a private repository. Right, guys, so just a little bit of me going on and on there, but just to give you a bit of a insight in terms of the interface that are part of GitHub itself. Right. All right, so let's continue and look into cloning a repository. Now, cloning a repository can be useful if you want to work on an existing project that you find on GitHub. So let's say if it's public or private and you have the permissions, on any repository you can go to the code and you can clone it. Now, a default option which you can do is you can also download the zip code, and that is going to be the full packed code for you. But of course, you need to set it up and organize it in the fashion that you desire. Or you can just clone it, and this is more helpful, like I mentioned, when you want to work and continue on this existing project instead of just obtaining the raw code as is. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to, first of all, want to have an empty directory on your computer. So I'm going to create a new directory here, and I'll call this test project. Then I'm going to open up a new git bash terminal. And we're just going to resize it. Remember, make sure you keep your other one open as well. And here I'm going to say cd desktop / and this folder is called test project. So I'm now within here, and this is where I want to clone my repository into. So what I can do here is I can just head on back and I can go to code, and I can utilize HTTPS. Now remember, you can also use SSH or the GitHub CLI if you want to clone repositories. So I'm going to use HTTPS, copy the following URL, and you need to make sure here in your directory that you say, first of all, git clone space, right click, paste, and then you paste in that URL. And then at the end, you just want to say dot at the end here. So you can go ahead and clone accordingly. And there you go. So now you'll notice that if you go to test project here, it's going to clone all of those necessary files. So here we have it. Everything is now in test project. So if I were working on another project, I can just carry on with that in test project itself. Right, so very well done. We can now close this window for test project, and we can just keep the one we're working with. So we're not using test project anymore. We'll just carry on like normal. Okay, so that's how you can clone a repository that you want to work with. Okay. Now, the next thing we want to look at is branching. So as you can see, we've been working with the main branch, and we can also utilize other branches that are out there. So let's say we're part of a big development team, and we have a few developers working on a particular feature of our application, whether it's a login feature, a registration feature, or any sort of feature. And this all forms part of a main branch, of which we have several other branches that are connected to it. So let me demonstrate. Let's say we're working on our project and we are in charge of setting up a new feature, and this is going to be the registration page. So we would typically open up our Git bash terminal in the project directory, and you would say git checkout -b and then the name of your branch. So here we're in main, and we can say feature /register. For example, and -b here, this flag here, is to create a new branch, and this is the name of the branch name, and checkout is typically used when we are working with branches and such. So if I were to say that, we can see now that we've switched to a new branch, and we're now working in the feature register branch, and here is where I'm going to add in the necessary logic for implementing a new feature. So register means registration, for example. So I'm going to add a new file, and I'll call this register.html. I'm just going to keep it very simple, and I'm just going to say here h1 register an account, and I'll add in a paragraph tag here that says in progress. Okay, so there's my register.html page. We can see it's been untracked. And something else I also want to show you, before I actually track it and add it and everything, let me switch back. So let's say I want to switch back to the main branch now. So I can say git checkout, and what I can do is refer to what I want to check out to. I want to go to the main branch. So now, as you can see, I have now switched up to the main branch here. Okay, so that is how you can switch between the branches that you're working with in your code. Okay. So let's go back. So I can say git checkout, and now I want to go to feature /register. So that's the register branch that I'm working with, and we can say clear. Okay. Right. Now the next thing that we want to do is we want to add our files. So we created it with the feature register. So we can say git status, and here I can see it's on track. So that means I need to run git add, and then git commit, and the message here I'm going to say added in the register page. Okay, and there we go. We can see it's been added. So if I head on back, okay, we can see it has been removed. The untracking has been removed. So that's how we can set up our branching accordingly. All right, now the next thing, of course, would be the focus of pushing this particular origin. So pushing our branch to GitHub would be the next step, and this is also going to house that particular change that we've added in. So that's the next thing that we want to look into. Right. Now, before we do that, there's something I want to mention. So you're probably wondering, okay, so the one branch dealt with one piece of code, the other branch dealt with the other piece of code, but why do I have register here? Okay, and I have all the other files. So good question. If I go back here and I now say git checkout and I were to say main, you're going to now notice that I'm working in my main branch now, but now I cannot see or work with that register of the HTML page because it's now on its own branch. Now, earlier you could, because remember, we didn't add or commit to any branch. It was wide open. But now when you commit within another branch, okay, and you switch to another branch, you're going to see that whatever you committed to said branch stays in said branch. Main, everyone will have access to, but on a specific branch commit, not everyone's going to have access to that. So that's just something I wanted to clear up. Okay, so let's head on back to where we were. So git checkout, and we want to say feature register. You can say clear. And now what we want to do is we want to push those files now to GitHub. We want to push that branch. So I'm going to say git push origin, and it's called feature/register. Okay, there we go. So we push that branch and the associated code. So if we go to GitHub, we can now see that we have this feature register branch here that had recent pushes 2 seconds ago. Right, so we can now merge via our pull request. You can technically also merge in your Git Bash terminal as well. You can switch to the main branch and then merge in the terminal here. But what's recommended is to do it in the GitHub terminal. So you can say compare and pull request. So this is very helpful if, for example, you're working with others and you have contributors that are working with you on your project and adding features. Here you can look at their requests that they've pushed to you, and you can see they want to push this to the main branch here, and we have the ability to merge because we are the host account. And here you can add in some information or description here, and you can create this pull request itself. And we can see the changes of the code or what's been added or set up or anything of the like here. And as you can see, we've selected feature register, and we want to branch this to merge into our main repository here. So then we can just say create pull request. Been added, and here, of course, as you can see, we will be able to merge it. You can also add in some comments here for anything that you want to add in or anything of the like, and then you can just say merge pull request. Okay, then you can see the commit message there, and if you want to add anything extra, you can just say confirm merge. There we go, so it's been merged. So now if I go to my code base, I can now see that I now have access to this register, that HTML file here, which you can see I didn't have access to earlier. So it's now been merged. So that's how you can deal with merging. But like I mentioned, you can also do it in your terminal here. So if you wanted to merge locally without dealing with a pull request, what you would typically do is you would switch to your main branch first of all. So you would say git checkout main. Then you would go to your main branch. Okay, and then what you would do is you would go on ahead and say git merge, and then you'll say feature/register. And then you would push on your main branch that you have here, git push to the main branch. So that's another way in which you can merge as well. Okay. Okay, so now that we're on our main branch, you can see that we haven't got any of those updates. So we don't see this latest change here in our main repository. So what we can do is just say git pull origin main. There we go. Say clear. And now we can see we got that back here for us, and we now have access to it. All right, there we go. So that is the core parts here that we have learned. So we have gone through the fundamentals that you would need to know when you're utilizing Git and GitHub together. Of course, there are a lot of other things that you can add and learn and utilize here, but this is part of the fundamentals. So just to give you a bit of understanding to at least get started with the basics that you need to know, that any developer needs to know, anyone coding on any scale, of utilizing Git and GitHub. I hope that you found it helpful, and thank you for the support, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.